she's staring at.
This is Tron Deadly Discs, released in 1982 for the Atari 2600 video computer system, based on the hit 1982 film Tron, and one of the first video games I ever played when I was a kid back in the late 80s on my Atari 7800 Pro system. It was a fun game back in the day. Hell, it's a fun game today. But it is also a fairly simple game. You shoot discs at other little guys to kill them, avoid getting killed yourself, which isn't that hard since you could withstand a few hits before expiring. But we're not talking about this game. At least not in this form. No, today's subject matter is Tron Deadly Discs, released in 1982 for the Intellivision, one of 3 Tron games to grace the system, the others being Tron and Tron Solar Sailor, which we'll look at later. But I wanted to start with Deadly Discs since it was the inspiration for the superb 2600 port, and the Intellivision version usually has a couple bells and whistles that the later port lacked. But does that make for a better game, or is it a case of too much overthinking spoiling the sauce, as it were? Well, look at the controller you're using with the overlay, and you tell me. Or rather, I'll tell you and you'll complain about it later, because this is a holy grail of sorts or something or other. Anyways, the general premise of Deadly Discs is straightforward enough. You control Tron, and your main objective is to clear the screen of enemies by eliminating them with your eponymous Deadly Disc. Each wave consists of 3 foes, and every so often a new foe will enter the field to replace a defeated one unless you eventually clear them all, upon which a new trio of enemies will appear. Strike the doors they emerge from to turn them green and use them as an escape route if 2 are along the same line. Tron can withstand a couple hits before expiring, at which point the game is over. There's no visual indicator as to how many hits Tron can take other than whenever he's hit he moves a bit slower, but after a while he will recover. As you score more points, you'll eventually confront more skillful foes with even deadlier discs, and every so often a recognizer will appear to seal off all the open doors in the room. Touching a recognizer will end your game instantly, while touching a probe will freeze you momentarily while the recognizer is doing its business. And the game will continue from there, and so on and so forth. So this is on Intellivision, right? And that means this game makes use of the stock Intellivision controller, which, thus far, has not been all that favorable to use outside of maybe one game.
Mattel Electronics presents B-17 Bomber.
B-17 Bomber.
B-17 Bomber.
But the good news is that Deadly Discs does not use the side fire buttons that are awkwardly placed on the side and hard to press. The bad news is that it uses the number pad, with each number dedicated to shooting the disc in a particular direction, which seems like a neat idea on paper, but in practice, the buttons themselves are so stiff and almost unresponsive, it's more of a hassle than it's worth. Now, the game does feature an alternative method of control where you use one controller for movement and another for aiming and shooting, and this would have been fine if you were using the disc on the second controller to shoot your discs, no pun intended, similar to a twin-stick shooter like Robotron, but no, you're using the number pad on that second controller, much like you would on the first controller, which makes me wonder what was even the point of this control method if you're just gonna do... I'm thinking that maybe they overthought this a bit. Yes, they did. Now, Deadly Discs on Intellivision does boast one other feature lacking in the Atari version, and that is the ability to block. By pressing the block button, the 5 key, Tron will go into a blocking stance where he can block enemy discs, with each block earning him points similar to striking a foe. Again, neat idea on paper, but it's not really all that effective, and the controls, once again, are a culprit in this. And that's a bit of a shame because Deadly Discs has the making of a slick update to the game featured on the 2600. That people still consider this to be one of the highlights on the Intellivision console shows that despite the somewhat gimped controls, there's still some enjoyment that could be derived from Deadly Discs. However, it's a reserved enjoyment putting up with flawed controls and a general lack of speed compared to the simpler and more responsive VCS version. Now, unlike that version, which only had one play mode, Deadly Discs on Intellivision boasts 4 different game speeds, with the default fast setting being somewhat comparable to the 2600 version in terms of overall game speed, but still feeling a bit stiff due to the controls. Most of this video features gameplay from the least slowest speed because I found that to be the most tolerable. Anything slower than that really isn't worth the effort. Like, I think the idea is that the slower game speed is supposed to make the game easier, but it just makes it more dull and slothing and just, no. I would not recommend it. Graphically speaking, Deadly Discs has a fairly basic appearance. Plain little running people in the arena, gray floor with a black grid, the overall arena skewed for added perspective, which makes it look better than the very plain looking 2600 version. The recognizer that pops in every once in a while certainly looks the part, and the effect in which the running people disintegrate when they're de-rezzed or killed or whatever, it's been a while since I watched this stuff, folks, is a nice but simple touch. Sound-wise, it's okay. Some basic sounding hitting sounds and throwing sounds par for the course on the hardware. The hum of the approaching recognizers does add a bit of tension to the proceedings, but other than that, it's typically average audio fare on the console. Not much else to say there. Honestly, I'm a little mixed on this, because on the one hand, Tron Deadly Discs is often considered a favorite among the Intellivision faithful, and to its credit, it does boast a few more features and elements that makes it a more complete game compared to the VCS conversion. On the other hand, using the numpad for shooting your disc feels detrimental due to its stiff, unresponsive nature, and that's an issue regardless of what speed you're playing the game at. Regardless, if you can put up with the stiff controls, there is a fun time to be had with Deadly Discs, and I'll go so far to say that out of the 3 Tron games that graced the Intellivision, this is probably the best of the bunch. But all things considered, I'll just stick with the Atari version. It's not quite as pretty, it has less stuff, but damn it, it has better controls, and I'll take that any day of the week. Sorry.